but I don't know if any of you have seen him in anything else, but I thought he was really, really good and possibly goes under the radar because all the performances are so good. I mean, it's desperately sad, and that seeing this sort of this decay that happens so quickly. From basically the moment that it's not even the moment that the girlfriend says, "Oh, I'm pregnant." It's the breakup over text. I mean, how the tension builds in that to that moment where she then responds, and the way it's filmed as well, the way it's shot, just suddenly go, "We are over," and then just suddenly the incredible decline that he goes through so quickly as well. It's quite scary in a way, and then also just to top it off, the sort of the punishment of the American judicial system, like Jesus Christ, something like that happens, and 30 years, bang, that's it. It's really just it's sort of scary to even watch, but I thought I found myself like a lot more like really moved by it today, having watched it yesterday. I don't know about you. I found myself being more moved today when reflecting on it than I did actually watching it, and I really loved it watching it as well. But it had this knock-on effect, just on the way that I felt inside. I don't know. I felt sort of, but all day today.
Like a knot. What, like a knot in your belly?
Yeah. Just a knot that needed to be untangled, and it has now. But just sort of half of today, it made me feel weird all day. But clearly, very good thing.
Well, it's also I had that knot before anything had gone to shit in the film as well, which I still don't quite understand. Like when they were when everything was really rock solid, and there was first 20 minutes, and they're just a family unit. And there's loads of scenes of, the father being supportive for the son and all this stuff. I remember feeling kind of like emotional even then, before anything had even like hit the fan. And so when everything did hit the fan, there's like a fat contrast between all of that stuff you're watching at the beginning, and then like everything like within the space of within the space of a day or whatever, you've got the girlfriend saying she's pregnant and his shoulder being absolutely botched, and like everything's completely unraveled. You see this completely different side to a lot of their characters, and just watching them trying to hold it all together. It just felt really real. It didn't for a long time feel like I was watching a film. I don't know if the actors were ad-libbing much of the time, but I got the sense that they were. Like I got the sense that they just had the freedom to say what came to mind, in the scenes, given like a basic structure of the scene and a few lines, or even like a whole script worth of lines, but then the director saying, if something else comes out that sounds more natural or sounds more in the moment. That's what I felt watching it.
Yeah, I felt that.
I don't know anyone else like that.
Yeah, I thought exactly the same. It felt too natural to be scripted, but I think that's why so many of the scenes were kind of impactful. There were so many times at the beginning of the film where I thought it was going to go down a certain avenue, because so many of the current themes in America, obviously like the opioid crisis. So when that came in, I thought, oh, that's the clear trajectory. And there were a couple of times, and I think it seemed like he was on such a tightrope throughout that whole first section, that there was that constant tension. So when it kind of came to the end, you were still really kind of moved by it. I think this is the first film I think that we've watched since doing these recorded reviews that I was properly moved by. Where you completely moved by it, but you kind of saw it coming, because you kind of saw him teetering the whole way through, didn't you? I'm not sure if anyone else saw that.
Yeah,
I think it was quite nice the way it didn't.
Sorry, Jem, go for it.
I would say it's quite nice the way it didn't play into that traditional trope. Obviously,
Yeah.
He wasn't a jock, but it was like high school wrestling jock type thing. It didn't go down some of the avenues that you would maybe think it would. Like you said, it showed a bit of the oxycodone, but didn't go too heavily down it. And I thought it balanced it out nicely, being a rounded story as opposed to just sort of being another high school trope type thing.
It's going to counter that then. Do you think there's maybe a slight naivety in the representation of some of the social issues. That was the one thing that came into my mind, is that maybe it didn't delve deep enough into some of these things. I know it can seem a bit cliche doing so, but sometimes
I think it would have been nice to see a little
these things
more.
enough.
I think it would have been nice to see a little bit more of the girl who was pregnant, just to see, because you didn't get anything other than what he saw from his car window when she ran off.
Be very careful with your focus in these films, though.
Yeah,
I feel like the film's heart was in the right place, like throughout the entire thing.
I think the more characters you focus on,
I'm confused by these other things.
Would you argue though that Lucas Hedges, his character, probably had the most character development out of all of them?
Lucas Hedges?
Yeah.
No,
I don't think he did.
He had a decent amount of character
I think he had quite a significant amount. I think he was more developed than the daughter.
I think the only thing, if we're talking about characters that I guess could have been fleshed out more, I don't think they needed to go down the rabbit hole of the race issue, anti-abortion, the Oxycontin pandemic. It was quite refreshing that it didn't fall into that category of going down that route, because there's so much material out on it. Yeah. I quite like that it was focused on the family, and I agree with Liam's point. I think that the more characters that you try and flesh out and focus on, the less time you have to actually delve deeper into certain individuals and get emotionally tied to them. I think the reason we were all moved is because it was very clear there were one protagonist in the first half, one protagonist in the second, and you saw them kind of flourish because he had enough time to. I thought the only angle, I guess, it was very son first half, daughter second half. They did touch on it quite a lot, but it was more from the daughter's aspect. But the relationship between the parents, I guess, they potentially could have spent a little bit more time on that. There was one particular scene where they had an argument, but I thought that dynamic could have been represented a little bit more. It wasn't the intention of the director, so it's not a slight on the film. It's just something that potentially they could have done. But they still showed it, but just from the daughter's perspective and the way it affected her.
Oh yeah, most of the information he got about it was from that fishing scene. Yeah, when he just sort of poured his heart out.
But then maybe that was a good point to have it there, because it sort of boils up to that point, and you need that cataclysmic moment to start breaking characters down emotionally, to then have that really nice moment between him and the daughter, because it took the realization that he didn't do that with his son to be able to do that with his daughter in the first place.
See, I disagree. I think he did do that with his son. I think there was.
And he realised
there was just an interesting way of him showing it, which again, to link back to what we were saying about the fact that it didn't dwell on some of the social tropes that it could well have shone a light at, and it avoided them. I think it did it in the right way, and that it kept it very much about the story of a family and the effect of a family trauma and people grieving to overcome that. And it used the stuff like the difficulties that Black African Americans will have to go through in order to get such a solid career. Like he said, he had that discussion where he sat down with his son to sit down and you basically say, the reason I'm being so hard on you is because I have to push you to be X amount better than everyone else, because you don't get given the same privileges that any other normal person, potentially would do in this world. I'm doing it for you. And it was quite an interesting insight to use maybe those social points to give him a little bit more of, or give the audience a bit more of an understanding behind his motives and the way he is, how he is with his son. And so in that respect, I do think they had those moments, and I do think they used those social pointers, but only to serve this story of the family.
Yeah, sure. And I don't think that I didn't even get the sense that it was like a concerted effort to try and like include these issues. It felt like, again, like this is their situation, and he's just describing his situation to his son. It never felt like, oh, we have to include social issue X and social issue Y. It just felt like watching the film. those were all things happening in the world of these people, and they were explored as far as it was within that character's perspective that we were following. But interestingly, with the scene that you talk about with Sterling K. Brown and the son, that scene, which was inspiring and nuanced and all these things. The fact that was placed like after he'd found out that his shoulder had been like wrecked, I thought was really interesting, like structural decision, because there's so much tension there now, because you understand why the kid must be thinking, oh, I can't tell him now. I'm gonna have to just go for this fight and do him proud and all this stuff that he's inspiring me with, that's real, and that is kind of related to how I'm going to experience any kind of success in life. There's all these things running through his head after this like really disorienting and disintegrating piece of information has been given to it. And so obviously there's a level of dramatic irony to it. But I just found that enthralling, that the structuring of certain scenes where they would later be able to build tension. That's as much as I could come up with, like technically speaking, for the film. And I think it happened later on in the film too, but that's the only thing I caught wind of and wrote about.
The thing there, Liam, which that you've kind of helped me identify, is that one of the most interesting things about all of the characters is that they all act with the best intentions. Like there's obviously a terrible thing that happens and the consequences are terrible, but the way in which the motivations behind Tyler doing the things that he does, the fact that he wants to go and impress upon, his father, the fact that he knows he's not going to be the responsible adult to bring a child into the world, etc. And you can put that either side as well. The father's doing what he thinks is best by the son, and that line that you mentioned earlier, Jem, around this, that ultimately he's not a monster, he's just a human being, and so was everyone. Everyone felt very human, but that to me was kind of the beauty of it, in that everything felt very human, felt very real, and it felt like the kind of situation that he's landed in is it could have kind of happened to anyone, like that kind of thing could happen.
That's what I found scary about
easily.
It. It's quite came
down to lack of communication. Ultimately, a lack of communication and misplaced rage, and he gets himself into a situation that it's fairly relatable in the sense that you can see it could happen to anyone.
The lack of communication was huge with regards to the whole abortion stuff, because I just kept thinking in my head, they keep talking about having a conversation, but they never get to have that conversation. They never get to have it.
I think it's just showing the immaturity, isn't it?
There was always some kind of rage, some kind of like emotional impulse that got in the way for either of the two of them. And then, there was the breakdown by text, which never helps. But again, it's not drawing attention to like the pitfalls of social media. That's a good example. Again, it's there in the background. Texting is clearly, or using WhatsApp or whatever, is a terrible way to try and preserve some kind of like bond with regards to these difficult issues. But it wasn't saying, oh, social media this, social media that about it. So,
but again, that's the time, isn't it? It's what Thomas says, it's what makes it relatable. It's what makes it all the time, is the fact that people do communicate by text. People do Instagram and get angry because they see things happening, and that's what, as you said, might date it, but makes it relevant certainly now.